I'm Kristen Goodwin. On this episode of the Fox News Rundown, President Trump continues to declare that the U.S. is rounding the turn on the pandemic, while former Vice President Joe Biden and health officials warn things could get worse as winter approaches. Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar discusses how the federal government is responding to a nationwide surge in COVID-19 infections and the progress made towards finding a vaccine. And with 6 days until Election Day, there's been plenty of buzz about battleground states. President Trump's re-election hopes could hinge on winning North Carolina's 15 electoral votes. The state is also a key player in Democratic lawmakers' push to regain the Senate. Fox News correspondent Mark Meredith joins the rundown with reporting on recent poll numbers in the Tar Heel state and a nail-biting Senate race in South Carolina. Plus commentary from Fox News contributor Pastor Robert Jeffress. The Fox News Rundown is a daily news podcast where we take a deeper look at the stories important to you. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast player by going to foxnewspodcast.com.
I'm Bill Hemmer.
I'm Janice Dean.
I'm Juan Williams, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Wednesday, October 28th, 2020. I'm Jessica Rosenthal. New treatments exist and a vaccine is on the way, but for now, cases of COVID are surging, hospitalizations are up, and winter is coming.
You do not need to shut down to protect public health. Wash your hands, watch your distance, wear your face coverings when you can't watch your distance.
I'm Dave Anthony. It's a state that's not just key to who wins the presidential election, but also which party controls the Senate. North Carolina.
You now have a Democratic governor. You've got a close Senate race. This is what a state you would think maybe solid red, but it's really not. This is certainly a toss-up state.
And I'm Robert Jeffress. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
One thing is certain, no matter who wins the election November 3rd, we will still be talking about COVID-19 for weeks and months to come, especially as we deal with a surge in cases nationwide now. The CDC says COVID-19 circulation and associated illnesses have been increasing since September, driven primarily, they say, by activity in the southeastern and central parts of the country. That since the end of September, weekly hospitalization rates have increased, driven mostly by an increase in rates in adults 50 years and older. Saturday saw a new case high total in the United States.
Just last Friday, 83,000 new cases in one day. Saturday, another 83,000 cases. Nearly 1,000 people a day are dying. Another 200,000 deaths are expected over the next several months.
Former Vice President and Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden said we will control the pandemic, contrary to what President Trump's chief of staff said over the weekend. The president said this week, after surviving COVID himself, that we would be worse off if Biden had been in charge during this pandemic.
We will deliver record prosperity, epic job growth, a safe vaccine that quickly ends the pandemic, and we're rounding the turn. They hate it when I say it. With or without, we have the vaccine. It's going to be great.
Meanwhile, 2 weeks after Dr. David Nabarro with the World Health Organization said lockdowns and shutdowns should be a last resort, that poverty and economic implications are important to consider, the WHO's Mike Ryan said this week, after looking at virus numbers in Europe and the United States,
it may require shutting down and restricting movement and having stay-at-home orders in order to take the heat out of this phase of the pandemic.
As the next phase will be colder, literally, and as more people gather and stay indoors during winter, the virus may shift yet again.
Well, cases are in fact increasing, especially in the Midwest, upper Midwest, and the plains and upper plains areas. We're seeing fairly substantial increases in numbers of cases.
Alex Azar is the Health and Human Services Secretary.
But frankly, we're seeing this really in large parts of the country right now. These changes are driven really by individual behaviors. A lot of it is coming out of household gatherings, people just getting together with family members, extended family, neighborhood gatherings, friends, and we're seeing a lot of transmission that way. And that's why we're trying to emphasize to people right now, as we move indoors, as it gets colder, please, you got to still practice those 3 W's more than ever inside, which is wash your hands, watch your distance, wear your face covering when you can't watch your distance, and stay out of settings where you can't do those things.
We have roughly 42,000 people hospitalized. That is not the highest number we've seen during the pandemic. But the president says, despite these numbers, we're turning a corner. It might not feel like that when we look at these increases. But what is your sense?
Well, what the president's talking about is, first, we're in a dramatically better position today than we were many months ago, and just from a mortality perspective on this disease, in April, if you were 70 years and above and you got COVID, you had over a 30% chance of dying. Now that has been reduced by almost 70% in terms of the potential mortality impact on you, thanks to the therapeutics that the president's leadership has brought: remdesivir, steroids, convalescent plasma, higher quality care, adequate equipment, ventilators, et cetera, in the system. And then what he's talking about is, because of Operation Warp Speed, we are on the cusp of next-generation therapeutics like these monoclonal antibodies that can prevent and treat the disease, as well as vaccines, just really weeks to months away from all of that. And that's the real hope here. But we need people in the interim to bridge to that by really good individual behaviors, practicing those 3 W's that I mentioned.
I want to get more into that, but I have one more question about the increasing numbers, because we're hearing from, as you said, sort of localized regional areas, New Mexico, Texas, Wisconsin, and of course Utah, that there are some hospital capacity issues because of COVID. Are we talking about maybe having FEMA and Army Corps go back out and build those makeshift hospitals like we kind of did back in April?
So we're here to support them. We're actively engaged through HHS and FEMA with all of our state partners. We're talking directly to hospital systems also. Right now, what you see is increasing cases that lead to increasing hospitalizations. And if they get to capacity levels, they'll first work to manage their capacity, of course, with elective procedures that are filling up beds in their hospitals. But we will be there to support them. We're fielding any requests for healthcare personnel or other types of support. That's what we're here to do, to back them up. And we've been able to manage that with the states that we're interacting with. We haven't seen major size requests at this point, but we're engaged with all of them to provide the support that they might need.
Talk to me about what you were just talking about, the treatments. Let's start with the president's case, because as we all know, our president had COVID, and he talks about Regeneron's antibody therapy, that he felt like Superman, that he even calls it sort of like a cure for him. Can you talk about this therapy a little bit, especially since my understanding is Eli Lilly now says its antibody treatment does not work on those with advanced COVID?
So first, let's talk a bit about what these therapies are. So when you get the virus, your body has a natural immune response, hopefully, to it, which produces antibodies, which go after basically tackling and killing the virus. Convalescent plasma, which is what we authorized over the summer, is taking those antibodies that somebody's body has produced in recovery and then giving those to somebody else. Monoclonal antibodies, the Regeneron or the Eli Lilly treatment that are being studied, that's when we actually bioengineer those antibodies so we can make them in massive quantities and also with purity and give you a very potent dose. And so that's what the president received, was a cocktail of these monoclonal antibodies from Regeneron, and you give that to someone when the virus is still in an earlier stage, in an outpatient setting, so that you can tackle that virus. And I think what we saw with the Lilly drug was, once somebody is in advanced disease, as you mentioned, in the inpatient setting, you already have enough viral replication that it may be too late for it to have that type of effect. So you've got to get to people earlier, after they've been tested positive and are vulnerable. And that's those outpatient studies, and both Lilly and Regeneron have publicly stated that they have filed applications with the FDA to authorize that use for their products.
Okay. And the vaccine, I know we have a few contenders that are sort of at that late stage of trial, right? So I think you said earlier in this very interview we're weeks, months. So where are we with the vaccine?
Sure. So we have 6 candidates that we've invested in or contracted with. 4 of them are in late-stage clinical trials. 2 of them are basically fully enrolled in their 30,000-person-plus clinical trials. That's Moderna and Pfizer. And we're just waiting right now for data to read out from those 2 programs in particular. That is out of our control. The data will come out whenever pre-specified endpoints are met in those trials, whether that's 3 days from now or 3 weeks from now. What we ought to be celebrating is that would be an unprecedented speed for getting data on a vaccine for a novel pathogen. Literally, we're talking 10 to 11 months after that hit our shores, this virus, that we are talking about bringing vaccines to the American people. Nobody thought that was possible back in January.
But then you have another uphill battle, right? And that is convincing people that something produced that quickly is safe.
Well, I think it's important to educate people why was it done, why and how was it done quickly. It wasn't done quickly by cutting any corners in terms of the programs, in terms of safety of individuals. What we did is the president said, let's use the full power of the federal government and its financial resources. So a drug company would normally stage out their investments, and it would take time as a result on the development program. Right. We absorbed all those costs up front, meaning we could move from one stage to the next within 24 hours in these trials instead of months and months of delay. And then we also started manufacturing all 6 of these vaccines. We are literally making millions of doses of vaccine as we speak and stockpiling them, which no drug company ever would have done. That's why you don't have a 6-month to year delay even after FDA approval to produce the vaccine. So that's what's being done. We're not cutting any corners in terms of the FDA's standards here for authorizing any vaccine.
How close are we to having like a rapid, accurate, maybe even at-home test? Like, I imagine if we had that, like, where I could maybe test myself daily before leaving the house, that would be like a major help. Or is that just way too idealistic to want that?
Well, we already have actually delivered the rapid, accurate, immediate tests. Those are now 50% of the 3 million tests that we have per day available are those rapid point-of-care tests. Now, what we don't have yet is a home-based test. It's important, though, to remember that when no country has done anything like what we've done in testing, and no country has a protocol where you would try to test everybody every day. It's neither realistic nor is it an appropriate use of testing that 330 million Americans would test themselves each day. You test for people who are symptomatic or people who have been around people who have contracted the disease. That's for diagnosis. And then you test for people as a surveillance tool to identify, especially with asymptomatic people, outbreaks that may be occurring under the surface. We have that capacity right now. The president bought 150 million of a rapid paper-based test that now we're giving out to the states. The issue of home testing is really a matter for companies need to show the data that people could safely swab themselves without any type of clinical supervision and evaluate the test results. The technology is there. It then becomes just about human accuracy on doing that and FDA approval.
I feel like we've had some conflicting information from the WHO. Mike Ryan, again, just this week said we might have to restrict movements and even do shutdowns again. He said at virus numbers in Europe and the United States. But just a few weeks ago, a different official with the WHO, Dr. David Nabarro, said lockdowns should be a last resort. And he cited, tanking economies and poverty as crucial to consider. Which is it?
I'm shocked. The WHO is giving out conflicting public health information during this crisis. This is the problem with WHO's approach. When we did travel restrictions, they attacked our travel restrictions, which helped protect the American people so that we could delay and flatten the curve here in the United States. When we called on people to wear face coverings, they weren't calling on people to wear face coverings. It's very clear. You do not need to shut down. You do not need to shut down to protect public health. But you do need to engage in these basic public health behaviors if you're in an impacted community especially. Wash your hands, watch your distance, wear your face coverings when you can't watch your distance, and stay out of settings, especially these indoor household gatherings with multifamily or neighbors, when you're not able to practice those 3 Ws. We have shown with data that we can turn these outbreaks around. We've done it in Phoenix and elsewhere with those simple practices that still keep us back to school, back to work, back to worship, back to healthcare, and re-engage in our civic and public life.
Secretary Azar, thank you so much for your time.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
This is Robert Jeffress with your Fox News commentary. Coming up.
1 week from today, the election will be over. Though, who knows if we'll know who won. Perhaps Joe Biden.
Stop seeing dignity in one another. We've stopped showing each other respect. Too many among us spend more time shouting than listening, more time fighting and working together.
The Democratic nominee campaigned in Georgia.
Have we passed the point of no return? Has the heart of this nation turned to stone? I don't think so. I refuse to believe it.
The former vice president says he can bring unity as Biden tries to turn a state that went Trump red in 2016 Democrat blue. Now, the president went to 3 states he hopes to win again, but may not be able to afford to lose.
We're going to win the great state of Michigan. And we're going to win 4 more years in the White House.
The president also rallied in Wisconsin and Nebraska. Senator Kamala Harris, the Democratic VP nominee, went to another battleground state, Nevada, which Hillary Clinton won 4 years ago. Vice President Pence went to another state Republicans may not be able to afford to lose this time around, North Carolina.
Joe Biden's running mate put her radical environmental agenda ahead of North Carolina jobs and North Carolina agriculture. But I promise you, under President Donald Trump, we will always put American workers first.
Well, the vice president also went to South Carolina on Tuesday, sandwiched in between stops in Wilmington and Greensboro, North Carolina, where we caught up with Fox News correspondent Mark Meredith.
It's good to be back out on the trail. You know, it's just amazing to see how close we are to the election and to see these in-person events happening. I mean, it does remind you the election is so close. After we've been talking about it, it really is crunch time.
What is it like in Greensboro? It's the first of the 3 rallies of the day for the vice president. Does he draw a big enough crowd? Is it like when the president shows up?
It's similar in the way that it would look. So it's a very similar backdrop where you'll see, the Make America Great Again banners. You'll see a big American flag, and then they'll have Air Force Two fly just like Air Force One would right up to the tarmac here. In terms of crowd, no, it's not going to be nearly as large, but I also think that's by design. A Trump rally itself has a lot of logistics that go into this, and for a vice president to hold 3 rallies in a day, they got to be able to staff out as much as they can. The crowd is out here. I mean, they're enthusiastic. It's the same music that you'd hear at a Trump event. But I think what's so interesting, Dave, is that, North Carolina is a state that Trump and Pence won 4 years ago by, it was something like 170,000 votes. Right now, they are down by about 2 percentage points. Talk about what can change in 4 years' time. And North Carolina itself, I mean, you now have a Democratic governor. You've got a close Senate race. This is what a state that you would think maybe solid red, but it's really not. This is certainly a toss-up state.
Right. You talk about 2%. Are you talking about what the polls have been like in the last couple of weeks?
I am. That's exactly right. So we follow, obviously, different polling here, but I was just looking at the Real Clear Politics average, which takes a look at all of the polls that are coming in, and they show, again, a Biden-Harris lead, but by less than 2 points. So that really could be within the margin of error. And what we're really waiting to find out is what will all of this early and absentee ballots kind of tell us about where the race was. Already, this is amazing, 2.6 million North Carolinians have already stopped in person to vote early. That is an incredible number. And then you add to that 800,000 people that have sent their absentee ballots back in. So the ballots that they got in the mail, those returned. I mean, that's essentially half of all of the registered voters in North Carolina. They've already decided to vote. So what's interesting when you talk about these rallies, the question has to be, how effective are they? Because you've already got half of the state already voted. So that's why you've seen the campaign continue to hold these over the last several weeks, whereas maybe you're seeing the Biden-Harris ticket doing these rallies closer till the election day. It'll be very interesting to see once the final results are cast what kind of impact that early voting has had.
Yeah, it is interesting because there's been a lot of record early voting in different states across the country, and I was just looking, and there was an analysis on Real Clear Politics that said in North Carolina in 2016, early voting, Democrats had a 10% advantage over Republicans, rather 13% advantage over Republicans in 2016. Currently, it's 10%. So 4 years ago, Democrats had a bigger early voting lead in that state than they do now. And, of course, the president and the vice president won that year. So who knows what it's going to be like?
And we've also seen a major shift in the number of people deciding to go for non-preference voting or independent. So obviously, the numbers can only tell us, some of the story. North Carolina is a swing state, and you talk to people here on the ground, they seem fairly divided. The state still has very strong COVID-19 restrictions in place compared to other places in the South. You go across the border, South Carolina, it feels like a completely different place than where we are in North Carolina. I've been in Raleigh, I've been in Charlotte, and here in Greensboro, things remain fairly strict when it comes to COVID restrictions.
The vice president also taking a trip to South Carolina in one of his 3 stops of the day. Is that for really Senator Lindsey Graham more than it is for the Trump-Pence ticket, you think?
I would have to think so. I mean, I can't imagine a situation where the Trump-Pence ticket would end up losing South Carolina. I'm a former resident of that state. That is as pretty much solid red as they come. Now, in terms of what you're talking about, that specific Senate race with Lindsey Graham, there are a lot of people questioning whether or not he'll be able to pull this through. I know, obviously, he has been in the headlines with the confirmation of Judge Amy Coney Barrett as the Judiciary Chair, but now this is a chance for the Republicans to put all their efforts and a lot of money into making sure that he keeps his Senate seat. In terms of South Carolina, though, I would imagine that Trump and Pence will have no problem keeping the state this time around.
Right, but being from South Carolina, are you surprised that Senator Graham is in such a tough election fight?
The one thing with 2020 is it's hard to get surprised by anything at this point. I mean, Lindsey Graham has certainly made a name for himself as one of Trump's biggest supporters, and I feel like this is also a state that is, there have districts that have swung in South Carolina. I think of Charleston and what's happened since the 28 midterms. So, it's certainly possible that a congressional seat could flip. I would just be, really surprised if a presidential flip would happen in South Carolina. But obviously also Trump and Pence, they put a lot of time and energy into the Carolinas overall.
Democrats put an even bigger bullseye on Senator Lindsey Graham when he led the way for Republicans to get Justice Amy Coney Barrett onto the Supreme Court as head of the Judiciary Committee.
It's moments like this that make everything you go through matter. It's moments like this where you can tell young conservative women there's a place at the table for you. This is a groundbreaking, historic moment.
Democrats say Senator Graham broke his word when he told them in 2018 he would not support filling a Supreme Court vacancy in an election year. Graham counters it was the way Democrats treated Justice Brett Kavanaugh that changed his mind. His challenger is Jamie Harrison, who put a big focus on health care as Democrats fear Obamacare could be undone by the Supreme Court.
Many of our hospitals in some of our rural communities are closing right now. What are we going to do to tackle these disparities in health care that women, and particularly minority women, are experiencing right now? Senator Graham has failed in his 25 years to properly address these issues.
That was Jamie Harrison at a debate with Senator Graham on WIS October 3rd. Polls have varied as to who leads this race. In North Carolina, Democrats have another target in their quest to win full control of Congress. Senator Tom Tillis, who's just recovered from the coronavirus.
This is a person who time and time again shifts his positions, writes and rewrites his record in order to meet what the special interests need.
That's Tillis' challenger, Cal Cunningham, during a recent debate. Now, the Democrat has been dealing with the fallout of romantic texts that leaked, uncovering an extramarital affair Cunningham apologized for. Senator Tillis told Fox,
I honestly think that the only honorable thing Cal Cunningham could do right now is to withdraw from the race, reconcile with his family, and rebuild his reputation.
But Cunningham hasn't just stayed in the race. He's ahead in quite a few polls. Back to Mark Meredith.
Yes, that's been the case pretty much all along here, where Tillis has kind of been in the fight of his political life. Right now, the average that I've seen is that Cunningham's up by about the same that Biden and Harris are in this state, by about 2 percentage points. But this race has tightened just in October alone. It's amazing to see how close it's gotten. I want to say before Tillis was down by 6 points at the beginning of the month, and now they're essentially down 2. So, you'd have to say it's an even pace here. Tom Tillis is somebody that, obviously North Carolinians are always thankful to have a, majority in the Senate. But if the Senate's going to flip, this would be a chance for Cunningham to to be able to sell that majority here. So this is not only a presidential contest, but as you mentioned, a very, very important Senate race. Cal Cunningham has had to deal with a little bit of a scandal of his own with an extramarital affair, and obviously that is possible that it could weigh on voters' minds. But you have to think, too, about who's coming out for Cunningham right now. This is likely not about a personal issue, but how they feel about the current administration and about the balance of power in the Senate as opposed to the candidate himself.
Yeah, and in North Carolina, have you seen a lot of signs around? Do you see a lot of Biden signs, a lot of Trump signs? Have you noticed anything? Does it look like it typically does?
I see a lot of TV ads, a lot of radio ads this morning. In terms of signage, nothing that would just, blow you away compared to other states like Iowa or New Hampshire before a contest. It just doesn't have that feel. I was in North Carolina when the RNC was supposed to happen. Remember, it was supposed to be in Charlotte, then it was moved to Jacksonville, right, and then it was moved back to Washington. And I'll tell you what, that was something that was surreal to me, because this was an area for the Republicans to really show we are going to put every resource we have into North Carolina, really try to sell this state, and then it didn't happen. The convention that I saw that one day that it happened down here was almost a joke. I mean, it was 1 or 2 signs outside the convention center. There was not a big turnout. They had a lot of security, but you would never have known there was a convention here. And I also am really curious how many businesses are really upset with the way that they kind of got shafted by not being able to get that revenue back into the city of Charlotte and, of course, all throughout North Carolina.
Well, it's certainly going to be interesting. Those 15 electoral votes are very much up for grabs, and either side, they want them badly. Mark Meredith, Fox News correspondent in Greensboro, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It's the Perino and Steyerwalt I'll Tell You What podcast. Dana Perino of The Five and Fox News political editor Chris Steyerwalt dissect the ins and outs of national politics. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Robert Jeffress.
What's on your mind?
Every time an election rolls around, our national conversation reaches a fever pitch. Politics are all anyone can talk about. People argue endlessly about this policy and about that candidate. And then about half of them stay home on Election Day and don't vote. You may feel fed up with politics. You may be ready to wash your hands of the whole dirty business. But that's not how God's people are told to act in the political sphere in Scripture. As a Christian and as an American, it's not only your right to vote, it's your responsibility. In the Old Testament, when the people of Judah were hauled off into exile in Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar, the prophet Jeremiah wrote them a letter. You might think he would have told them, "All right, everyone, here's the plan. Whatever you do, be sure to keep yourself out of Babylonian politics. Hide in a holy huddle. Wait for God to smite those pagans and then hurry on back home to Jerusalem." But that's not what Jeremiah said. He delivered this message from God in Jeremiah 29, verse 7. "Seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare." God was under no illusions that Babylon was a perfect place. It was a decadent and wicked city. Yet God told his people not to withdraw. He told them to engage. They didn't know how long they would be there. They knew they were ultimately citizens of God's heavenly city. And yet they were told to dig in and get to work on behalf of Babylon. They were supposed to pray and work to make their earthly city just a little bit better than how they had found it. This didn't mean compromising on their convictions or throwing out their Bibles, but it meant doing what they could do to help make things better. Jesus taught us the same thing. When he was asked to name the greatest commandment in the law, he refused to name just one. He named two. "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all of your soul and with all of your mind. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." We're not supposed to have a relationship with God while neglecting or ignoring the needs of our neighbors. We're called to work for their good. That means we have to care about politics, because politics is where we haggle over how best to seek out the common good. In our country in particular, we have a participatory democracy. As John Jay, the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, said, God has given us the privilege of choosing our leaders in this Christian nation. So it's our job to vote for the candidate and the party whose policies will best contribute to the moral and spiritual good of our neighbors. Or we should at least vote for the party who will hurt the common good the least. Politics in a sinful world will always be messy and imperfect. Every nation will resemble Babylon a lot more than it will resemble the New Jerusalem. But that's no excuse for disengaging from politics out of disgust or despair. Sitting it out is no option at all. For the love of God and neighbor, get out there and vote. Then pray to the Lord on behalf of our nation and trust Him with the results. This is Robert Jeffress with Fox News.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com. It's the latest from Fox News Podcasts. The Campaign with Bret Baier, with updates from reporters on the trail and in-studio experts. Bret keeps you informed on the 2020 race. Go to foxnewspodcasts.com and download The Campaign with Bret Baier now.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.